I need the big room now for dogs. Why are you not understanding me?
He means the penthouse suite. He just wants to confirm the arrangements for his dogs and their handler.
The lobby of the prestigious Royal Plaza Hotel was silent, except for the heavy breathing of Mason Sterling, the general manager. He had just ordered security to throw out the disheveled, shouting man in the oversized coat. "Get this trash out of my sight!" Mason roared, straightening his tie. But before the guards could lay a hand on the stranger, a soft, trembling voice cut through the tension. "Stop! He isn't drunk. He's asking for help." All eyes turned to Alicia, the invisible waitress everyone ignored. In the next 5 minutes, she would not only save a life, but destroy Mason Sterling's career forever. This is the story of how one forgotten language changed everything. The Royal Plaza Hotel in downtown Chicago wasn't just a hotel. It was a fortress of exclusivity. To work there was to be invisible, especially if you were on the bottom rung of the ladder like Alicia Hart. At 24, Alicia had learned that the best way to survive at the Royal Plaza was to be part of the furniture. She was a waitress in the lobby lounge, a job that required her to be present enough to refill a coffee cup before it hit the saucer, but absent enough that the wealthy clientele never had to acknowledge her existence. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind of grey, biting December day that made the hotel's golden chandeliers seem even more aggressive in their brightness. Alicia was polishing silver spoons at the service station, her mind miles away. She was thinking about the stack of medical bills sitting on her kitchen counter in her tiny studio apartment. Her mother's surgery had been successful, but the cost was a suffocating weight that pressed down on Alicia's chest every time she took a breath. "Hart, you're daydreaming again." The sharp voice made Alicia jump, nearly dropping a spoon. She turned to see Mason Sterling looming over her. Sterling was the general manager of the Royal Plaza, a man who wore Italian suits that cost more than Alicia's car, and who treated his staff like malfunctioning appliances. He was a man obsessed with optics. If it didn't look expensive, Sterling wanted it gone. "I'm sorry, Mr. Sterling," Alicia said, lowering her gaze, "just making sure the silverware is spotless for the lunch rush." "It better be," Sterling sneered, checking his reflection in the polished brass of the espresso machine. "We have the delegation from the Global Tech Summit arriving this afternoon. I don't want a single smudge. And for heaven's sake, Hart, fix your hair. You have a stray strand. It looks messy. We sell perfection here, not mediocrity." "Yes, sir," Alicia whispered, tucking the loose strand of brown hair behind her ear. As Sterling strutted away, clicking his heels on the marble floor, Stella, another waitress, and Alicia's only real friend at the hotel, leaned in. "I swear that man practices being a villain in the mirror every morning," Stella muttered, grabbing a tray of empty glasses. "Don't let him get to you, Elle. You're the hardest worker here." Alicia forced a smile. "Hard work doesn't pay the bills, Stella. Overtime does. And Sterling threatened to cut my hours if I look messy again." "He's just on edge because of the VIPs, Stella said. "Apparently there's a rumor that Alexander Petrov is coming." Alicia paused. "Petrov, the energy tycoon?" "The very same," Stella nodded. "Multi-billionaire, reclusive. Rumor has it he's looking to buy a chain of hotels in the US. Sterling thinks if he impresses him, he'll get promoted to regional director. So everyone is walking on eggshells." Alicia went back to polishing. She knew who Alexander Petrov was, not because she followed business news, but because her grandfather, a stern but loving man who had raised her after her father left, used to talk about the old country constantly. He had been a professor of Slavic languages before immigration forced him into manual labor. He had insisted Alicia learn languages. "English opens doors, Alicia," he would say, "but Russian opens souls." She hadn't spoken a word of it since he passed away 3 years ago. It felt like a secret life she had left behind, just like her dreams of becoming a translator at the UN. Dreams that died when the medical bills started piling up. "Table 4 needs water," Sterling's voice barked from across the room, snapping Alicia back to reality. "Move, Hart!" Alicia grabbed the crystal pitcher and rushed to the table. She was invisible. She was a ghost in a uniform. She just had to survive the shift. She didn't know that the man who walked through the revolving doors 10 minutes later would make staying invisible impossible. It started with a commotion at the front desk. Usually, the Royal Plaza's lobby was a sanctuary of hushed tones and soft jazz, but the jarring sound of a heavy fist slamming against the mahogany reception desk shattered the peace. Alicia looked up from the cappuccino machine. Standing at the front desk was a bear of a man. He was tall, with broad shoulders that seemed to stretch the fabric of his thick, dark wool coat. He looked nothing like the polished clientele the hotel was used to. His hair was wind-blown and greying, his face ruddy from the cold, and he was clutching an old, battered leather briefcase that looked like it had survived a war. "Sir, please, you need to lower your voice," James, the young concierge, was saying, his voice trembling slightly. The man shouted something back. It was loud, guttural, and undeniably angry. He gestured wildly with his hands, pointing at the computer screen, then at his watch, then at the ceiling. "I don't understand you, sir," James pleaded, looking around for help. Alicia froze. The man wasn't drunk. The cadence, the specific rolling of the R's, she recognized it instantly. Mason Sterling emerged from his office like a shark smelling blood. He saw the disheveled man, the battered briefcase, and the disruption, and his face turned a deep shade of crimson. This was exactly the kind of optic Sterling despised. "What is the meaning of this?" Sterling demanded, marching up to the desk. "James, why is this vagrant screaming in my lobby?" "I don't know, Mr. Sterling," James stammered. He walked in, slammed his hand down, and started yelling. "I think he's intoxicated. He's speaking gibberish." Sterling turned his cold eyes on the stranger. "Sir, you are disturbing our guests. I must ask you to leave immediately." The large man turned to Sterling. His eyes were a piercing, icy blue, filled with frustration and something that looked like desperation. He barked a sentence at Sterling, pointing a thick finger at the manager's chest. "Ja skazal tebe, mnie нужен mój numer. Gdzie mój pomocnik?" Sterling recoiled, brushing his lapel as if the man's words had physically soiled his suit. "I do not speak, whatever that is, and I do not tolerate aggression. Look at you. You look like you slept on a park bench. This is a 5-star establishment, not a shelter." The man's face darkened. He slammed the briefcase onto the counter again, rattling the expensive vase of lilies. He shouted again, louder this time, his voice cracking with emotion. Guests in the lobby were starting to stare. Some were pulling out their phones to record. Sterling saw the phones and panicked. He couldn't have a scene like this on the day the Global Tech Summit delegates arrived. It would be a PR disaster. "Security!" Sterling screamed, his voice pitching high. "Get him out! Now!" 2 large security guards in black suits materialized from the shadows near the elevators. They moved toward the man with professional menace. "No, wait!" The thought escaped Alicia's lips before she could stop it. She was standing behind the bar, gripping a tray. She could hear what the man was actually saying. He wasn't threatening them. He was panicked. "Vy ne poнимаете? Это вопрос жизни и смерти!" The man yelled as the first guard grabbed his arm. "You don't understand. It is a matter of life and death." Alicia's heart hammered against her ribs. She looked at Sterling, who was sneering with triumph as the guards began to drag the struggling man toward the revolving doors. The man was strong, fighting back, but he was outnumbered. He looked terrified. If Elysia intervened, Sterling would fire her. She knew it. He hated insubordination more than anything. If she lost this job, she couldn't pay for her mother's post-op medication. She would be on the street. "Stay invisible," a voice in her head warned. "Stay a ghost." But then the man shouted one last thing as the guards shoved him toward the exit. A name. "Moyadok, Sophia, Onatam. My daughter, Sophia, she is in there." He wasn't trying to check in. He wasn't drunk. He was a father looking for his daughter. Elysia dropped the tray. The sound of smashing glass echoed through the lobby like a gunshot. The entire room went silent. Sterling spun around, eyes wide with fury. "Hart, what have you done?" Elysia didn't answer him. She stepped out from behind the bar, her legs shaking, and walked straight into the center of the lobby, directly toward the guards and the struggling man. "Let him go," Elysia said. Her voice was quiet, but in the silence of the lobby, it carried. Sterling looked at her, as if she had grown a second head. "Excuse me. Get back to your station and clean up that mess, or you are fired on the spot." "I said let him go," Elysia repeated, louder this time, stepping between the lead guard and the stranger. She looked at the Russian man, meeting his terrified blue eyes. She took a deep breath, channeling her grandfather's voice. "Kto sluchilos? Vi ischete Sophia? What happened? You are looking for Sophia?" The effect was instantaneous. The large man stopped struggling. His shoulders slumped, and he looked at Elysia as if she were an angel descending from the ceiling. Tears welled up in his eyes. Da! He gasped, clutching Elysia's hands with his callous grip. "Wy govorit po-ruski? Slava Bogu. Yes, you speak Russian? Thank God." Sterling marched over, his face purple. "Hart, what is this? You know this vagrant? I told you, no personal visitors at work." "He's not a vagrant, Mr. Sterling," Elysia said, turning to face her boss, her fear replaced by a cold clarity. "And he's not drunk. He's trying to tell you that his daughter is upstairs in one of the rooms, and she's not answering her phone. He thinks she's in danger." Sterling scoffed, crossing his arms. "Likely story. He's probably a stalker, or trying to scam his way into a room to rob guests. Security. Remove both of them. Hart, you're done. Get your things." "If you throw him out," Elysia said, her voice trembling but firm. "And something has happened to his daughter. The police won't be looking at me, Mr. Sterling. They'll be looking at the man who denied a father help because he didn't like his coat." The man gripped Elysia's arm again, speaking rapidly, pulling a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. It was a reservation printout. Elysia looked at it, then at Sterling. "He has a confirmation number, room 402, under the name Volkov." Sterling paused. Room 402 was a suite, a very expensive suite. He hesitated, looking at the man's shabby clothes, then at the reservation paper. "Check it," Elysia challenged him. "Check the system." Sterling snatched the paper from her hand and walked to the computer, typing furiously. His face went pale. The reservation was real, and it had been paid for in cash, 3 weeks in advance. It exists," Sterling muttered. He looked at the man with new eyes, not of respect, but of calculation. "Fine. But if this is a trick, Hart, I will make sure you never work in this city again." He motioned to the guards to release the man. The Russian man didn't even look at Sterling. He looked only at Elysia. "Pomogi man," he whispered. "Help me." "I'm coming with you," Elysia said in English, then nodded to him. They ran toward the elevators, leaving a stunned lobby and a fuming Mason Sterling behind. But the real drama was just beginning, because room 402 wasn't just a hotel room, It was a crime scene waiting to be discovered. The elevator ride to the 4th floor felt like it lasted a lifetime. The air inside the small mirrored box was thick with panic and the smell of expensive cologne masking the scent of fear. Alicia stood in the corner, pressing herself against the railing to give the large Russian man space. He was pacing as much as the confined space allowed, muttering a stream of prayers and curses under his breath. His hands were shaking violently. "Boże pomogie, tylko nie сейчас," he whispered, his forehead pressing against the cold metal of the elevator doors. God help her. Just not now. Mason Sterling stood by the control panel, furiously typing on his phone. He wasn't calling an ambulance. Alicia could see the screen reflection in the brass trim. He was texting the hotel's legal team. Guest disturbance, potential liability. Prepare NDA forms. "You," Sterling snapped without looking up, addressing the Russian man. "If there is nothing wrong in that room, I am billing you for security disruption and banning you for life. Do you understand?" The man didn't react. He didn't understand English, or at least he was too consumed by grief to care. Alicia looked at Sterling with a surge of disgust she had never felt before. "He is worried his daughter is dying, Mr. Sterling," Alicia said, her voice unusually sharp. "Maybe worry about the lawsuit later." Sterling's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing into slits. "Watch your tone, Hart. You are on thin ice. The only reason you are in this elevator is to translate. Once this is over, you and I are going to have a long conversation about your future." Ding! The door slid open. The Russian man didn't wait. He bolted out of the elevator, his heavy boots thudding against the plush, floral-patterned carpet of the hallway. He ran past the housekeeping carts, ignoring the startled looks of the maids, scanning the numbers on the brass plaques. 402! 402! He shouted. Alicia ran after him, her waitress apron flapping against her legs. Sterling followed at a brisk walk, checking his watch, annoyed by the spectacle. When Alicia caught up, the man was pounding on the door of room 402. "Sophia! Sophia! Odkroy dver!" Open the door. Silence. The man pressed his ear to the wood. He turned to Alicia, his face drained of blood. "Tishina. Ona ne odvechayet." Silence. She is not answering. "She might be in the shower," Sterling said, catching up and adjusting his cufflinks. "Or sleeping. Honestly, this hysteria is unnecessary." "Open it," Alicia commanded, turning to Sterling. "Use your master key." "I cannot just open a guest's room because a shouting man tells me to," Sterling scoffed. "It violates Privacy Policy Protocol 44B. We need reasonable suspicion of—" The Russian man didn't wait for Protocol 44B. He roared, a sound of pure animal desperation, and threw his entire body weight against the door. The wood splintered around the lock, a loud crack echoing through the hallway. "Hey!" Sterling shouted. "That is mahogany!" The man slammed his shoulder into it again. Crack! The door flew inward, bouncing off the wall. The room was dark, the heavy blackout curtains drawn tight against the afternoon sun. The air inside was stale and cold. "Sophia!" the man whispered, stepping into the gloom. Alicia followed him, her hand covering her mouth. Sterling lingered in the doorway, afraid to enter, afraid of what liability lay inside. The suite was a mess. Clothes were scattered everywhere. A suitcase was overturned. And there, lying face down on the carpet near the bathroom door, was a young woman. She had pale blonde hair fanned out around her head like a halo. She was wearing a silk robe, and one of her hands was outstretched, as if reaching for the phone on the bedside table. "Sophia!" The father collapsed to his knees beside her, turning her over. Her face was ashen, her lips a terrifying shade of blue. She wasn't moving. "Oh my God!" Alicia gasped. She rushed forward, dropping to her knees on the other side of the girl. Is she breathing? The man was sobbing now, shaking his daughter's shoulders, shouting her name. He looked up at Alicia, his eyes begging for a miracle. Ona kolodnaya, ona nadishit. She is cold. She is not breathing. Sterling finally stepped into the room. He saw the unconscious girl and his face twisted, not with sympathy, but with judgment. He spotted a few empty pill bottles on the nightstand. An overdose, Sterling declared, his voice dripping with disdain. I knew it. Junkies. Rich European junkies. Great. This is going to be all over the tabloids. He pulled out his radio. Security. Call the police. We have a drug overdose in 402. I want this contained. Use the service elevator. It's not an overdose, Alicia shouted. She had been scanning the girl's body. She grabbed the girl's limp wrist to check for a pulse. It was there, but faint and thready. Her skin was clammy. Alicia's eyes darted to the girl's wrist. There was a silver bracelet. Alicia flipped it over. The medical insignia was engraved in red. Type 1. Diabetic. She's diabetic, Alicia screamed. She's in insulin shock. She's not overdosing. Her blood sugar is too low. She needs sugar now. Sterling froze. Are you sure? Look at the bracelet, Alicia yelled. She turned to the father. She didn't know the word for diabetes in Russian, but she knew the universal sign for sugar. She mimed eating and pointed to the minibar. Sakar! Sugar! Bistro! Quickly. The father understood instantly. He scrambled toward the minibar, ripping the door off its hinges in his haste. He grabbed a can of Coke and a packet of chocolate. Don't give her the chocolate. She can't chew. She'll choke, Alicia warned. The soda. Just the soda. Alicia took the can from his trembling hands. She cracked it open. Help me sit her up. The father, with surprising gentleness for such a large man, propped his daughter's head up against his chest. Alicia carefully tilted the can, letting a small amount of the sugary liquid trickle into the girl's mouth, massaging her throat to encourage a reflex swallow. Come on, Sophia, Alicia whispered. Come on. For a minute, nothing happened. The room was silent, except for the father's ragged breathing and the distant siren of the ambulance Sterling had finally called. Then, a cough. Sophia's eyelids fluttered. She gasped, a ragged, desperate intake of air, and coughed again. The color began to creep back into her cheeks, replacing the deadly gray. Papa, she croaked, her voice barely a whisper. The Russian man let out a wail of relief that shook the walls. He hugged her tight, burying his face in her hair, rocking her back and forth. Yazdes, Milaya, Yazdes. I am here, darling. I am here. Alicia sat back on her heels, her whole body trembling now that the adrenaline was fading. She looked at the soda can in her hand, then at the father and daughter. She had done it. Well, Mason Sterling said from the doorway, clearing his throat. It seems the crisis is averted, though the damage to the door is substantial. The Russian man stopped rocking his daughter. He slowly turned his head to look at Sterling. The look of gratitude he had given Alicia vanished, replaced by a cold, hard rage that made the temperature in the room drop 10 degrees. He said nothing. He just stared. And for the first time, Mason Sterling looked like he wanted to disappear. The next hour was a blur of paramedics, police officers, and hotel security. Sophia was taken to the hospital for observation, her blood sugar stabilized but her body exhausted. Her father refused to leave her side, riding in the back of the ambulance, holding her hand like it was the only thing anchoring him to the earth. Before the ambulance doors closed, he had looked for Alicia in the crowd of onlookers outside the hotel entrance, but Sterling had already ordered her back inside. Get back to work, Hart, Sterling had hissed as the sirens faded. You've caused enough of a scene. I want the lobby spotless. And if you speak a word of this to the press, I'll sue you for breach of confidentiality." So, Alicia went back to work. She went back to being invisible. She collected empty glasses. She wiped down tables. She smiled at guests who looked through her. But her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She kept replaying the moment she realized it wasn't an overdose, the moment she saved a life. Around 5:15 p.m., the atmosphere in the hotel shifted. The afternoon shift was ending, and the evening crew was coming on. The lobby was buzzing with the arrival of the Tech Summit delegates. Men in sharp suits and women in designer dresses were mingling, sipping champagne. Alicia was behind the bar, polishing the same glass for the third time, when the automatic doors slid open. The noise in the lobby didn't stop, but it changed. A hush rippled through the room, starting from the entrance and spreading like a wave. Alicia looked up. Walking through the doors was the Russian man. But he looked different. Gone was the oversized, dirty wool coat. Gone were the disheveled layers. He was wearing a bespoke, charcoal grey suit that fit his broad frame perfectly. His hair was combed back. He was clean-shaven. He walked with a power and authority that commanded the attention of every person in the room. Flanking him were two men, not hotel security, but his own private detail. They wore earpieces and scanned the room with professional intensity. Mason Sterling, who was schmoozing with a group of tech investors near the fountain, spotted the newcomer. He didn't recognize him at first. He saw the expensive suit, the power, the entourage. Sterling's face lit up. This was the kind of guest he lived for. Sterling excused himself and hurried over, his best customer service. Smile plastered on his face. "Good evening, sir." Sterling beamed, extending a hand. "Welcome to the Royal Plaza. I am Mason Sterling, the general manager. How may I assist a distinguished guest such as yourself?" The Russian man stopped. He looked down at Sterling's outstretched hand, then up at his face. He didn't take the hand. A flicker of confusion crossed Sterling's face. Then recognition dawning. His smile faltered. His eyes widened. He looked at the man's piercing blue eyes, the same eyes that had begged for help just hours ago. "You," Sterling whispered. "But the police." "The police were very helpful," the man said. His English was heavily accented but perfectly clear, deep and resonating. "Unlike you." The entire lobby had gone quiet. The tech delegates were watching. The staff was watching. Alicia, freezing behind the bar, held her breath. "Sir, I think there has been a misunderstanding," Sterling stammered, his face turning pale. "I was following protocol. We have strict rules about security. I had no idea who—" "You had no idea who I was," the man interrupted. "That is the problem, Mr. Sterling. You treat people based on who you think they are. If I am in a wool coat, I am trash. If I am in an Armani suit, I am distinguished." He took a step closer to Sterling. "Do you know who I am now?" Sterling gulped. I... One of the men flanking the Russian stepped forward. "This is Alexander Petrov, CIO of Petrov Energy, and the new owner of the Continental Hotel Group." The glass slipped from Alicia's hand and shattered on the floor. Petrov, the billionaire everyone was talking about. The man Sterling had been desperate to impress to get his promotion. The man who was rumored to be buying hotels. Sterling looked like he was going to vomit. "Mr. Petrov, I am honored. I had no idea. Please let me make this right. I can upgrade you to the presidential suite. Complimentary, of course. We can—" "I do not want your suite," Petrov said, his voice cold. "I am checking out. I am moving my daughter to a hospital with competent care, and then we are leaving this city." Sterling looked like he was about to cry. "Please, Mr. Petrov, this will ruin me." "You ruined yourself," Petrov said. He turned away from Sterling, dismissing him as if he were nothing more than a smudge on a window. Petrov scanned the room. His eyes moved over the faces of the guests, the front desk staff, until they locked onto the bar. He saw Elysia. His expression softened instantly. The cold mask of the billionaire melted away, leaving the grateful father underneath. "You!" Petrov called out. Elysia froze. Every eye in the room turned to her. She felt small, exposed in her stained uniform. Petrov walked past Sterling, past the stunned security guards, and walked straight up to the bar. He stopped right in front of Elysia. "You are the waitress," he said softly. "Yes, sir," Elysia whispered. Elysia Hart." Petrov nodded slowly. "Elysia Hart, you were the only one who listened, the only one who saw a father, not a beggar. You saved my Sophia's life." I just translated," Elysia said, looking down. "No," Petrov said firmly. "You did more than translate. You stood up to him." He gestured blindly behind him at Sterling. "You risked your job for a stranger." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. It wasn't paper. It was heavy, metal, etched with gold. "I never forget a debt," Petrov said. "And I owe you everything." "Mr. Petrov, you don't owe me anything," Elysia insisted. "I'm just glad she's okay." "She is okay because of you." He placed the card on the bar counter. "I am buying the Regal Hotel chain next month. I need people who understand that service is about humanity, not just optics. I need a director of guest relations for my European division." Elysia stared at him. I don't have a degree in hospitality, sir. I'm just a waitress. You speak the language of the heart." Petrov smiled, a genuine, warm smile. "That cannot be taught in school. The job is yours if you want it. Triple your current salary, full benefits, and I will pay for whatever debts are keeping you here." Elysia's hand flew to her mouth. The medical bills, the crushing weight she carried every day, gone, just like that. Elysia choked up, tears spilling over. Yes, thank you." Petrov nodded. Then he turned back to the room. He looked at Mason Sterling, who was standing alone in the center of the lobby, looking like a man watching his life burn down. "As for you, Mr. Sterling," Petrov boomed, his voice carrying to the rafters, "I will be making a call to the current owners of this hotel. I will tell them exactly how you treat a father in distress. I imagine you will have plenty of free time to look for a new job starting tomorrow." Petrov turned back to Elysia, tipped an imaginary hat, and walked out the door. Elysia stood there, the metal card cool under her fingers. Stella, the other waitress, came up beside her and squeezed her arm. "Did that just happen?" Stella whispered. "I think so," Elysia said, wiping her eyes. But as the lobby erupted into whispers and Sterling stormed toward his office, slamming the door, Elysia knew the story wasn't quite over. Petrov had opened a door for her, but walking through it would mean leaving everything she knew behind. And Mason Sterling was not the kind of man who went down without a fight. As Elysia packed her bag in the locker room 20 minutes later, ready to leave the Royal Plaza for the last time, her phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. "Don't think you've won, Hart. You humiliated me." "Watch your back." Elysia stared at the screen. Sterling. She looked at the metal card in her hand. Director of Guest Relations. She deleted the message. She wasn't invisible anymore. And she wasn't afraid. The locker room in the basement of the Royal Plaza was a stark contrast to the marble and gold of the lobby. It smelled of bleach, damp wool, and exhaustion. Elysia sat on the wooden bench, her hands trembling as she unbuttoned her uniform. She folded the black dress neatly, habit was a hard thing to break, and placed it in her locker. She changed into her street clothes, a worn pair of jeans, and a thick grey sweater that had seen better days. She felt a strange mixture of elation and nausea. Director of Guest Relations. The title echoed in her mind like a song. She could pay off the debt. She could move her mother into a better apartment, one with heating that actually worked in the winter. She could breathe. She reached for her bag, a battered canvas tote, and slung it over her shoulder. She double-checked her pocket. The heavy metal business card Alexander Petrov had given her was warm against her hip. It felt like a talisman. "Goodbye, Locker 104, she whispered. She walked down the long concrete corridor toward the employee exit. Stella was waiting for her by the time clock. "You're really doing it?" Stella asked, her eyes wide. "You're really leaving?" "He offered me a job, Stella," Alicia said, a smile finally breaking through her anxiety. "A real job. In Europe." "Take me with you," Stella joked, though there was a sadness in her eyes. "Don't forget us little people when you're eating croissants in Paris." "Never," Alicia promised, hugging her friend. "And I'll make sure Petrov knows you're the best waitress left in this place." They walked together toward the security checkpoint. Usually the check was perfunctory. Old Mr. Henderson, the night guard, would just wave them through with a sleepy nod. But Mr. Henderson wasn't there tonight. Instead, standing by the metal detector were 2 police officers and Mason Sterling. Alicia's steps faltered. A cold knot of dread tightened in her stomach. Sterling was leaning against the wall, his arms crossed, a smug, predatory smile playing on his lips. He had changed his shirt, but his face was still flushed with the humiliation from the lobby. "Going somewhere hot?" Sterling asked, pushing off the wall. "I'm going home," Alicia said, clutching her bag tighter. "My shift is over. I quit." "You don't get to quit," Sterling said, his voice smooth and dangerous. "Not yet. Officers, this is the employee I told you about." One of the police officers, a tall man with a buzz cut and a tired expression, stepped forward. "Ma'am, we've had a report of a theft from the general manager's office. Mr. Sterling claims a valuable item went missing during the commotion this afternoon." "Theft?" Alicia laughed nervously. "I haven't been in your office in months, Mr. Sterling, you know that. I know that you took advantage of the chaos caused by that Russian lunatic." Sterling spat the words. "You were the only one unmonitored for 20 minutes while you were playing hero in the elevator and the hallway. And miraculously, my grandfather's antique silver watch, valued at $40,000, is missing from my desk." "I was saving a girl's life," Alicia shouted, her anger flaring. "I was nowhere near your desk." "We need to search your bag, ma'am," the officer said, stepping closer. "If you have nothing to hide, it will be quick." "Search it," Alicia said, handing over her canvas tote. She had nothing to hide. All she had in there was a library book, an apple and her wallet. The officer placed the bag on the security table. He unzipped it. He moved the book. He moved the apple. Then he reached into the zippered interior pocket, the one Alicia never used because the zipper was stuck. He tugged the zipper open. It gave way easily. The officer reached in and pulled out a heavy, ornate silver watch. Alicia's blood turned to ice. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Stella gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. "That's not mine," Alicia whispered, shaking her head. "I've never seen that before. He planted it. He put it there." "I haven't been near your locker, Hart," Sterling lied smoothly, inspecting his fingernails. "I've been in meetings all afternoon, managing the crisis you helped create." "You liar!" Alicia lunged toward him, but the second officer grabbed her arm, spinning her around. "Ma'am, calm down. You are under arrest for grand larceny." "No, no, please," Alicia cried, as the cold steel of the handcuffs clicked around her wrists. "Check the cameras. Check the locker room cameras." Sterling chuckled darkly. Oh, didn't you know? The locker room cameras are down for maintenance. Such a pity. Bad timing. He leaned in close to her, close enough that she could smell the peppermint on his breath. I told you, Elysia, he whispered, so only she could hear. I told you to watch your back. No one humiliates Mason Sterling. You're not going to Europe. You're going to jail. And once you have a criminal record, Petrov won't let you within 10 miles of his hotels. Tears streamed down Elysia's face. It was a nightmare. It was a trap, perfect and vicious. She was going to lose everything. The job, her reputation, her freedom. Take her away, officers, Sterling said loudly, straightening his tie. I want to press full charges. I want her made an example of. As the officers began to drag a sobbing Elysia toward the exit, the heavy metal doors of the loading dock swung open with a deafening crash. The noise was so loud that everyone froze. The officers, Sterling, even Elysia. Standing in the loading dock doorway, silhouetted against the streetlights of the alley, was Alexander Petrov. But he wasn't alone. Behind him were 4 men in suits, and beside him, wrapped in a thick blanket and sitting in a wheelchair pushed by a nurse, was Sophia. Sophia looked pale, but her eyes were open and alert, and she was pointing a shaking finger directly at Mason Sterling. That's him, Papa, Sophia said, her voice weak but clear. That's the man who wouldn't open the door. Sterling's face went from smug triumph to sheer terror in the span of a heartbeat. Mr. Petrov, what are you doing at the employee entrance? You should be— I was leaving. Petrov's voice was a low rumble, like distant thunder. My driver was taking us to the private airfield, but Sophia woke up, and the first thing she asked for was the girl with the voice, the girl who gave her the sugar. Petrov walked into the room. He seemed to fill the entire space, his presence sucking the air out of the room. He looked at the handcuffs on Elysia's wrists. He looked at the silver watch in the officer's hand. Then he looked at Sterling. What is happening here? Petrov asked. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. This woman is a thief, Mr. Petrov, Sterling stammered, trying to regain his composure. She stole my grandfather's watch. We found it in her bag. The police are just doing their job. I am protecting the integrity of the staff. Liar, a quiet voice said. It wasn't Elysia. It wasn't Sophia. It was Stella. Stella, who had been cowering in the corner, stepped forward. Her hands were shaking, but her chin was high. He's lying, Stella said, her voice trembling. Mr. Sterling came down to the locker room 20 minutes ago. He said he was doing a sanitation inspection. He had a master key. He opened Elysia's locker. I saw him put something inside her bag, but I thought he was leaving a note or a severance check. I didn't know it was a watch. Sterling's eyes bulged. You lying little brat. I'll fire you. I'll ruin you. You opened the locker? The police officer asked, looking at Sterling with suspicion. You said you were in meetings all afternoon. She's lying. She's covering for her friend, Sterling shrieked, sweat beading on his forehead. Check his pockets, Petrov said. Excuse me? Sterling gasped. The master key, Petrov said, taking a step closer. If he opened the locker, he needed the master key. But general managers don't carry the housekeeping master key unless they check it out from security. If he has it in his pocket, he's lying. I... Sterling patted his pockets nervously. Officer, Petrov commanded. Check him. The officer looked at Petrov. There was an authority in the billionaire's voice that superseded even the badge. The officer turned to Sterling. Sir, empty your pockets. This is ridiculous. I am the victim here, Sterling protested, backing away. Empty them, the officer barked. With shaking hands, Sterling pulled out his wallet, his phone, and a distinct key with a red tag, the housekeeping master key. "We keep a digital log of who checks out that key," Stella added, gaining confidence. "If we check the security log upstairs, it will show Mr. Sterling checked it out 30 minutes ago." The silence that followed was deafening. Sterling looked around like a trapped rat. He looked at the police, who were now unhanding Alicia and looking at him. He looked at Petrov, who looked ready to tear him apart with his bare hands. It was a test," Sterling blurted out, a manic grin stretching his face. "A loyalty test, to see if Hart would confess. It's a standard management technique." Petrov walked up to Sterling. He towered over the manager. "You tried to frame a woman who saved my daughter's life," Petrov said softly. "Because she bruised your ego." Petrov turned to the police officer. "Officer, I would like to report a crime. Attempted framing. Filing a false police report. And—" Petrov glanced at the silver watch. "Insurance fraud? I am guessing this heirloom is also insured?" The officer nodded grimly. He took the handcuffs off Alicia's wrists. "I'm so sorry, ma'am," the officer said to Alicia. Then he turned to Sterling. "Turn around, sir. Hands behind your back." "No, you can't do this. Do you know who I am?" Sterling screamed as the cuffs clicked onto his wrists. "I am the general manager of the Royal Plaza." "Not anymore," Petrov said. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number on speaker. "Hello? Alexander," a voice answered. It was the CEO of the current ownership group of the Royal Plaza. "John," Petrov said, "I am buying the hotel. The deal is done. Send the paperwork. But my first act as owner is effective immediately. Mason Sterling is fired for cause, and I want him prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." "Done," the voice on the phone said. Sterling was dragged away, kicking and screaming, echoing down the concrete corridor. Alicia rubbed her wrists where the metal had pinched. She felt lightheaded. She looked up at Petrov. "You came back," she whispered. Petrov smiled. He reached out and took her hand, not with the handshake of a boss, but with the warmth of a friend. "I told you, Alicia," he said. "I never forget a debt." Sophia wheeled herself forward. She reached out and took Alicia's other hand. "Thank you," the girl said, her blue eyes shining with tears. "My dad told me you knew I needed sugar. You saved me." Alicia squeezed the girl's hand. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," Petrov said, looking at the empty doorway where Sterling had been dragged out. "You did what nobody else did. You saw us." He turned back to her. "The offer still stands. Director of Guest Relations. But I think we will start you with a promotion. How would you like to be the general manager of the Royal Plaza? I need someone who knows how to clean up the mess Sterling left behind." Alicia looked at Stella, who was grinning from ear to ear. She looked at the drab locker room walls. She thought of her grandfather and how he said Russian opened souls. "I would love that," Alicia said. 6 months had passed since the chaotic afternoon that shattered the hierarchy of the Royal Plaza Hotel, and the transition from winter to early summer had brought more than just a change in temperature. It had brought a complete thaw to the frozen soul of the establishment. Alicia Hart stood on the balcony of the general manager's office, looking down at the bustling Chicago streets. The glass pane she leaned against was spotless, but for the first time in the hotel's history, the cleanliness wasn't born out of fear. It was born out of pride. She turned back to the room. The office, once a shrine to Mason Sterling's ego, filled with intimidating leather chairs, dark shadows, and awards he had bought rather than earned, was unrecognizable. Alicia had opened the heavy velvet drapes, flooding the room with natural light. The imposing mahogany fortress of a desk had been replaced with a round, approachable table made of warm oak. There were no closed doors here anymore. Alicia smoothed the lapel of her navy blue blazer. It was tailored, sharp, and professional, a far cry from the ill-fitting waitress uniform that had defined her existence for 3 years. But she didn't wear it like armor. She wore it like a promise. There was a knock on the open door frame. "Boss, you got a minute?" It was Stella. The former waitress was now the front desk manager, wearing a crisp suit and a headset that she actually looked happy to wear. "For you?" "Always," Alicia smiled, gesturing for her to come in. "And stop calling me boss. It makes me feel like I should be yelling at someone about water spots on a spoon." Stella laughed, collapsing into one of the guest chairs. "Old habits die hard. I just wanted to give you the morning report. We're at 98% occupancy for the weekend. The delegation from the Peace Summit is checking in at noon and—" Stella paused, her grin widening. "Mr. Henderson says the lobby crew actually smiled when they came in today. Voluntarily. That's what happens when you pay people a living wage and treat them like human beings," Alicia said softly. "It's the Petrov effect," Stella noted. "Or maybe the Alicia effect. Speaking of the big man, a package arrived for you. From London." Stella placed a thick, cream-colored envelope on the desk. Alicia's heart did a little flip. She recognized the handwriting immediately. It was from Sophia. Alicia opened it carefully. Inside was a graduation announcement. Sophia had completed her preparatory courses and was starting art school, and a handwritten letter from Alexander Petrov. "To the woman who runs my hotel better than I ever could," the letter read. "Sophia asks about you every day. She is healthy, happy, and learning to manage her condition with the same bravery you showed us in that hotel room. I am planning a visit to Chicago next month to inspect the renovations, but mostly to buy you dinner. You have turned a building of stone into a home. I remain forever in your debt. AP." Alicia traced the signature with her finger. She thought back to that day, the desperation in his eyes, the way Sterling had dismissed him as trash because of a dirty coat. It was a lesson she had woven into the very fabric of the hotel's new policy. Every guest is a king. "Good news?" Stella asked. "The best," Alicia said, tucking the letter into her drawer next to the metal business card she kept as a reminder. "Sophia is thriving." "Thank God," Stella sighed. Then her expression turned serious. "Hey, there is one more thing. I didn't want to bring it up, but security thought you should know." Alicia looked up. "What is it?" "It's Sterling," Stella said, the name tasting like sour milk in the air. "He's outside, across the street." Alicia's expression didn't change, but her posture stiffened slightly. "Is he causing a scene?" "No," Stella shook her head. Well, you should probably see for yourself." Alicia walked out of the office, down the corridor, and took the elevator to the lobby. The staff nodded to her as she passed, genuine nods of respect, not the terrified flinching of the past. She walked through the revolving doors and out into the warm June afternoon. She crossed the valet circle and stood on the edge of the sidewalk. Across the street, near the entrance to the public park, a city maintenance crew was working. They were clearing debris from a clogged storm drain. Among the crew, wearing a bright orange vest over a stained t-shirt, was Mason Sterling. He looked years older. His hair, once slicked back with expensive product, was thinning and messy. His face was gaunt, the arrogant sneer replaced by a hollow, defeated exhaustion. He was scraping gum off a park bench, his movements sluggish and bitter. The lawsuit Petrov had launched had been merciless. Sterling hadn't just lost his job. He had been blacklisted from the hospitality industry entirely. The attempted framing of an employee, combined with the insurance fraud regarding the watch, had resulted in a hefty sentence of probation and thousands of hours of community service. He had lost his condo, his car, and his social standing. The optics he had worshipped had ultimately destroyed him. As if sensing eyes on him, Sterling looked up, his gaze locked with Alicia's across the busy avenue. For a moment, the noise of the traffic seemed to fade. Alicia stood there, the general manager of the city's finest hotel, bathed in sunlight. Sterling stood in the gutter, holding a scraper. He stopped working. He looked at the hotel, his former kingdom, and then at her. He opened his mouth as if to say something, perhaps to shout an insult, perhaps to beg. But no sound came out. The shame was too heavy. He simply lowered his head, turned his back to her, and went back to scraping the bench. Alicia didn't feel the surge of triumph she thought she might. She didn't feel the need to point or laugh. She just felt a profound sense of balance. The universe had corrected itself. "He looks miserable," Stella said, appearing at Alicia's elbow. "Karma is a you-know-what." "He built his own prison," Alicia said quietly. "He spent his whole life looking down on people. Now he has to look up from the bottom?" Alicia turned away from the sight of the broken man. She looked back at the Royal Plaza. The doorman was helping an elderly woman with a walker, laughing at a joke she had made. A bellhop was playing peekaboo with a toddler while the parents checked in. "Come on, Stella," Alicia said, a genuine smile lighting up her face. "We have a VIP delegation arriving in an hour. I want to make sure the welcome amenities are perfect. I hear one of the delegates loves dark chocolate." "On it, boss," Stella grinned. "And Stella? Yeah? If anyone comes in wearing a dirty coat and looking lost, make sure they get the best table in the house." "You got it." Alicia walked back through the revolving doors, the golden light of the lobby swallowing her in a warm embrace. She was no longer the invisible girl polishing spoons in the shadows. She was the heart of the hotel, a living testament to the fact that while clothes might make the man, it is character that makes the leader. And as the door spun shut behind her, shutting out the noise of the street and the ghost of Mason Sterling, Alicia Hart finally felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. And that is how Alicia Hart went from an invisible waitress to the owner of the very hotel where she was mistreated. It's a powerful reminder that kindness is a language that everyone understands, and arrogance is a trap that eventually snaps shut. Mason Sterling learned the hard way that you should never judge a book by its cover, or a billionaire by his coat. If you enjoyed this story of justice and karma, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And if you want more stories like this, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a twist. What would you have done if you were in Alicia's shoes? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.